Hi, hello, and welcome to Books Insight, the podcast where we try to give insight into books. I'm Ren,
I'm done.
and today we're going to be talking about organization. Since it's spring, it seems sort of appropriate, moving things around, out with the old, in with the new, dusting and whatnot. So we thought, what better topic for book lovers for spring than organization? How do you put your bookshelves together and why? So, Dee, do you want to take it away?
Sure. I'll give you the brief overview of my system,
Mm,
which is only a partial system. I would say like with like. So let's say, fiction goes with fiction and nonfiction is a separate group. But within any group, I don't have a clear organization. And my reasoning is both laziness and, let's say, with literary criticism. I know I have a particular book, so I can go to that section and start looking for that particular book. Meanwhile, I'm reminded of all the other books in that general area that I have. Whereas if it were strictly alphabetical, I would probably go much closer to right to the book and ignore everything else. So to me, it's just sort of a reminder of what I have by keeping the like with like. And then one other thing is within, let's say, literary fiction, at least, the authors all together. Let's say Hemingway, all of his stuff is
mhm.
together, and then it's followed by all of the stuff about him that I happen to have, or about any particular book of his. So all of that goes as one big chunk. James Joyce has a whole shelf full. We have a visitor.
I do. Say hello, my cow cow.
Well,
No
very good.
thoughts, this
Yeah.
guy.
So that's pretty much it. As far as the topics go, I think I've got things like um, literary criticism, poetry, Eastern religion, um, mythology. Some of them are a little blurry. Like I can see I've got mythology and I've also got psychology mixed in with that because it's an imperfectly handled system. But the general principle would be like with like, but not alphabetical order.
Okay. Here, 1 second. I have to deal with him.
I like your chair back. At a glance, it looked Aztec. I
Sort
don't
of.
know.
What is it? Yeah, it's kind of abstract. I'm not sure what it's supposed to be now that you mention it.
It keeps you from falling over backwards anyway.
True.
Okay, so
Okay,
how do
so
you
kind of
organize?
like with like and then general sections. Is that how you've always organized your books?
Pretty much. I would say I get pretty lazy and just look for a space. I mean, there's other issues like the size of the book and the size of the shelf. So unless you're going to, you know, start from scratch with unlimited funds and make a bookcase, based on the exact number of books you have, and room to grow, and then have the shelf height allow everything. Otherwise, you're going to be forced, as most of us are, to accommodate. Like I have a lot of tall books that are way at the top because there's no shelf limit size.
Yeah, I'm kind of running into that problem too. I guess a brief overview of how I organize my books. So I totally agree with you, and I want to get into this a little bit more about the necessity issue because there's obviously like the reality and the fantasy, and we'll get into the fantasy after we get through the reality. But the reality for me is that I really don't like to go out of my way to buy bookcases. I've gotten all of mine thrifted or at like our local antique shop. So it's just sort of like when one comes up, that's what I end up with. And so I have three that I think are probably like from IKEA originally or something that are just kind of crappy, but they're tall. And
Mhm.
then I have this one behind me, which is nicer, but it's like short. And then I have
Mhm.
just miscellaneous other weird bookcases that don't really make sense together that I've just acquired and filled in.
Mhm.
So, in that sense, I'm not super satisfied with the organization of them because I think that books as like putting books on display just by themselves looks really nice, but having the higgledy-piggledy aspect of the different sized bookcases, I think sort of makes it feel more cluttered than what it actually would if they all matched and it
Yeah.
felt more like wall-to-wall bookcases. But that being said, So the ones behind me started off, this was the first bookcase I got as an adult that I got to fill in myself. And so it was sort of meant to be like my favorite books. And it's devolved a little bit since then into just where does everything fit, which I think is going to probably be a common recurring theme.
Yes,
But
yeah.
the top row there is the only part of this that I would say is actually organized in any way, which is vibes. They're my pretty books.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's the classification for that shelf. They're just pretty decorative editions of books.
Right, right.
And then everything else are, because of the shape of the shelves, are like short pocketbook pocketbook
Right, right, right.
paperbacks. And then out in my living room where I have the taller, crappy bookcases, the part that I am actually really happy with that I got from a booktuber that I watch called Emmy. I don't even think she organizes her books this way anymore, but she did at the time and I really liked it and I've stuck with it, which is for her classics, which again, classic is sort of a nebulous designation, but for her classics, she did them in alphabetical, or not alphabetical, in chronological order.
That's interesting.
And I really liked that because those three bookcases happen to be more or less the same height. So I can
Hmm.
do it across the three
Oh, wow. Okay.
and do it that way. So it's just at eye level across. And it's helped me decide, I guess, what I think a classic would be considered as the bookcases and the collection has grown and shrunk and moved around, like what I've kept on that top row and what I've
Hmm.
taken out or what I've added. So, like, I noticed, for example, that I had a predilection to only consider classics things that were European, American, or Russian. And I was like, why? Like, why? That's silly. And so then I would add in like classic literature from like Japan as I got it, or from, I have one from South Africa that we got while I was there, and like different things that I sprinkled in so that it feels a little bit more well-rounded, but still fitting that theme. And again, it's a little arbitrary because what is a classic? When does that stop?
Yeah.
Mine accommodates going up to about the early 1970s because I wanted to put Toni Morrison on there because I felt like she belonged there,
Hmm.
and starts with Gilgamesh. So,
Okay.
but I would say the bulk of it is 1800s, so 19th century literature.
What would you do with, I think you read this, the John Gardner
Oh,
novelization of Grendel.
yeah.
Would that be next to Gilgamesh or would that be completely separate?
Well,
I'm
that
sorry.
one's little. That one's
I'm,
little, so
I'm,
it's over here.
wait, I'm confusing two things. Great. I meant Beowulf.
Beowulf.
And
Yeah, Beowulf, I would,
Beowulf.
yeah, for example, Beowulf, I would put up there. Yeah. I don't actually have a copy of Beowulf. I do have John Gardner's Grendel, but it's little, so he's here.
Okay.
But
Okay.
so that's that. And then the only other section that I would say is like pretty well thought out, other than just utility of size and shape, was my world like and translated fiction. I have enough
Um,
of that, and it's enough of an interest of mine that it felt like it deserved its own space. And so that I have alphabetized by country, so that I again kind of have a sense of what I have. So it starts with, I think the first one I want to say is Algeria,
hmm,
and it ends with, I just got one from recently from Zimbabwe. So I
hmm,
have A to Z, and obviously I don't have every country, but that's kind of the idea. So when I get something that's from a non North American country, and even then I've bent it a little bit because there were a few that I felt like still made sense to be there. Like I have a couple Canadian Indigenous authors where I was like, that'll represent Canada. I'll just put that for Canada. And then I had for the US something that I was like, I guess I can put this for that. So, you know, those types of things. But for the most part, that's pretty well done. And then I'll draw on those and move between like that and classics sometimes, depending on the space.
you have anything from South America or Mexico or that area?
Yeah, yeah, I do. So, from let's see, from Mexico, oh, I just read one that I didn't actually like, so um, so I wouldn't count that as my Mexican book read, but it was called like Water from Chocolate or
Oh,
like Water
oh,
for Chocolate.
yeah, I remember seeing that one around.
And
Yeah.
it was, that one's not for me.
Hmm.
But it's there.
Yeah.
And then South America. Well, I just finished this year. I read The General in His Labyrinth by Oh, who's the one that everybody, who's like the main one? He
Gabriel
wrote,
Garcia Marquez.
yes, by Gabriel Garcia. Yeah, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which I also didn't really like, but I also think that one wasn't really for me, just because I think I don't know enough about Simon Bolivar for that to have been as impactful as it was supposed to
Yeah,
be. So
yeah.
I would give him another try. I've not had very good luck with South America, but I think it's mostly my own fault because when I actually thought about it and looked on purpose, like from Argentina, I read a really good modern horror anthology that was called The Dangers of Smoking in Bed. And that
Oh,
was really, really good. But again, that was because that's the kind of thing I like and I
hmm.
knew I was gonna like. But it was done where she was obviously writing it with the intention of including a lot about Argentina in the
Okay.
collection. So it was Argentinian horror. It wasn't just horror that takes place in Argentina. It was like, no, this is integral to like what the horror aspects are, is that it's taking place here. And
Did you
so I liked
was
that.
was Borges in that anthology?
No, no, no. It was all her own. Her name
Her own. Okay.
is, yeah, so her name is Mariana Enriquez, and she's done a couple of collections. I would definitely read another one by her. It's not going to be for everybody because horror as a genre just isn't for everybody, but that was the one that I read from South America that I felt like I chose correctly. So I wouldn't go so far as to say like, oh, I don't like South American fiction generally, because I think I just picked two in a row that were just not good choices for me. But that one was really, really good. So.
I've actually had the same kind of experience. I didn't really get into Garcia Marquez, although I probably should return to him. I did like I only read it one way. You're supposed to read it two ways. It's called Hopscotch by Cortázar.
Oh, I've
I don't know.
heard of this one.
And Borges is the big name to me of South American writers. He's just really all very short works, some essays too, but very, very intriguing and influential, really cool. So anyway, but I actually have a lot of his stuff upstairs. When you started getting into this thing about world literature, it reminded
Mm,
me that I do kind of lump everybody together if they're literary. Like I have this one big bookcase upstairs on the landing that has most of the quote literary authors that I feel devoted to. Um, and I've been doing some pruning, going like, okay, I really like this guy. I got all this stuff. I read all this stuff, but I just don't have any desire to go back. So that guy might, or whoever it is, might move on to another book, somebody else's bookshelf.
yeah,
And that'll give me room to put some more things in.
exactly, right? That's the dream. Yeah, so I do my world literature things. I think it's interesting actually that you kind of put it all together. I've been thinking about my conception of my world literature shelves because I've been kind of loosey-goosey by what I mean by that exactly because some of it, if it's because at first it was going to be just translated, but then I ended up with things from like Ireland or Australia, and I'm like, well, those aren't translated, so that doesn't really make sense here, but they are non-North American or British
Cultures, yeah,
fiction,
yeah.
so like, should they not go here? And it just became more of a mess. And then it was also sort of like even things that were genre fiction I would put there if that was what I happened to get, and I would realize like, oh, this author is like Bolivian or something, but it's like a horror novel, like I'll go ahead and put that there for Bolivia. And so it was kind of all over the place, and so then
Mhm.
things that were in other places, it was just sort of like, Ren, what are you doing with this? So I think I need
Yeah,
to think again about where I want to draw certain lines for what belongs in these shelves
right,
just to make
right.
it make sense more so than I think it does right now. So that's one of my current organization projects. I haven't done anything about it, but it's on my mind.
Yeah, yeah. No, definitely that sense of organization does strike you every once in a while, and you think I should reorganize this because I don't like the way it is at the moment.
Mhm.
By the way, I didn't really get around to saying something that occurred to me when you were describing your bookcases, is
Mm.
that since I've been in the book world for so long, book trade, bookstores, I've amassed a ridiculous number of books, and your mom has a bunch of books too. And so we went with the bricks and boards style. So
Yeah.
you look at a wall and you say, how long of a board can I put across that wall for books, and how high is reasonable to go? And then you assemble the shelving that you bought that's based on that length. And I think the shelves themselves are about a foot deep each and different lengths depending on the wall they're on. And then you use the bricks to determine the height. Um, it's not a super expensive way to go as far as getting a tremendous amount of shelf space relatively cheaply. So
Yeah. Have you ever had any trouble with them?
well, it does, it's really just because of the tremendous number of books. Dusting, I really ought to get to more often and vacuuming and stuff. As you're building these things, bricks are not, these are not like minted expensive bricks. They're just ordinary bricks. So they're a little irregular. And I used to use quarters or 50-cent pieces to shore up, tottering balances. But once you get it done, it's pretty damn solid.
Okay, so you haven't had any stability issues with those?
No, nothing's ever fallen down or threatened to.
Mm,
And these are massive. These are pretty massive. I mean, let me just stand up for a second and see it compared to my height.
yeah.
I'd say the bookshelves. It depends on how many bricks per shelf, and they're not all exactly the same. But I'm about 5'10", and I'd say the bookcases are tending to be around that height or 6 feet,
Okay.
and various lengths. But anyway, it's a suggestion to people if they're thinking, "Gee, I really should have some sort of bookcase." Bookcases seem to be hard to come by. I mean, they don't. They're not right and left in like if you went to a flea market kind of
Yeah.
place, you're not going to see bookcases a lot. So you might have to make your own. And
I have found that to be true. And actually, that's part of that's actually an organizational frustration that I have with books, is that because the only bookcasing that's readily available is crap. And like,
yeah,
I don't just mean aesthetically, I mean like they are not that sturdy. That's why I was interested in the stability of the ones that you were making, because I'm going to be honest, even with those being homemade without any actual supports built in,
right.
like with nails or like
But,
holding it together except
yeah, they're just
gravity.
ending. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like because the and I'm picking on the IKEA ones just because I think that's where the ones I have are from,
Mhm.
but I've never had a sense that the shelving itself is sagging, but it crosses my mind like, is this gonna break? Because the backs of them blow out almost immediately because they're
Oh,
just a piece of not even really thick plywood, just like a piece of
yeah, yeah,
cardboard
yeah.
basically stapled
Tacked
to the
on to
back.
the. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Which again is fine if you're going to get it and never move it. But if you ever need to move it, it's going to fall apart. And ours have fallen apart on the back. Like the only thing holding the back on one of them is the fact that it's against a wall.
Well, I know a lot of people, their objection to the bricks and boards look is that it looks like a cabin, not an
Yeah.
elegant house or something. But if you have a space or a room that you're willing to devote to this, um, you can go to like a Home Depot or whatever the equivalent is, wherever anybody is, and get boards cut. Um, the boards are about 3/4 of an inch thick. And just in case anybody's wondering about the bowing question, let's say there's a bookcase here that's probably 7 feet across. And in the middle, I have a set of bricks also. So at the two ends and in the middle, if the stretch of wood is long enough to require it, and that there's been no sagging whatsoever. Everything's like ship shape. We've been here for 20 something years without a problem.
Yeah, I really wish I could do that. That was my great brick debacle, as you know, of 2021, 22, was that in this part of Canada, there's just no brick. Like I remember explaining this to mom that would because I had every intention of doing it that way because I think it looks nice and it's just practical and it's like very affordable compared to what it would cost to get a bookcase that's 7 feet wide.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
then when I went to three or four like Home Depot type stores in this
Mhm.
area where they do construction and things, and they just did not sell brick. So the only place that I found that sold brick was they wouldn't sell it to me because they were using it for like foundational construction work. And so they would only sell it like the whole pallet of bricks.
Mm, mm.
And I was like, well, I don't need a pallet of bricks. I need like 80 bricks.
I wonder if there's anything else that could substitute. One thing, I mean, this would be an absurd approach, but since I have a cockatoo that chews up, what do you call them, clothespins, after he chews them up, I save the clothespin is made with, you know, the two pieces of
Yeah.
wood and this little metal um, spring thing. And when he chewed up the wood, I saved the spring thing and put it in a jar. And I've had him doing this for so long that I've got many, many jars that are full to the rim, and they're very strong. So you could actually, I mean, if you had long enough to wait, you can get enough of these. They've disappeared from the house because we've had so many. Casey's taken them to a metal place where you can dump them into a scale and get money for them.
My God.
But other than that, they actually could be used to support the shelving. So just
Yeah.
be some other trick method if you can't
You
get bricks. I
know.
don't know what else to suggest.
I just found that so absurd. I just gave up. I was like, what do you mean I can't buy bricks?
Yeah, I don't know what else what other product would possibly serve. I can't imagine. Yeah.
It's fine. Life goes on.
Okay.
But
Because you could do, like, if you got the wood and dyed it or stained it or whatever, you could make it pretty elegant. And
yeah,
maybe
I know plenty of people who have built their own shelving kind of in a similar way.
Yeah.
Can you hear that?
no.
Somebody
Oh,
right outside my window's car alarm is going off.
oh
Let's
wow.
let's let that go through. Okay, stopped.
We were lucky, but we had a guy mowing a lawn next door, and that was very loud. He was driving one of those things that you sit on and it drives around. It was incredibly loud.
Anyway, but yeah, no, I totally agree. And actually, one of the other booktubers that I really like, Ariel Bissett, she's gotten really, really good. She has a lot of videos on her channel dealing with building her own bookcasing because she does the ones that are built into the wall. But so
Oh,
she'll do like, it's not like a bookcase built into the wall, but she'll do the shelving that's attached to the wall with brackets.
okay.
And she has a lot of videos where it's not a tutorial per se, but she goes through how she puts them together. And she's very particular about doing the staining and sanding. And she dedicates a lot more to it than I honestly probably
Yeah.
would, because
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with just the plain boards and bricks look for the most part.
Here's the thing too, by the way,
Yeah.
just another within the topic we're talking about. I was looking into this question about organizing. So online, somebody made these suggestions. I don't know if some of them are tongue in cheek or not, but here's 15 ways to organize your books: alphabetical, genre or category, by color, by size, by author, last name, presumably, which is pretty much what I assumed that. I get when they said alphabetical, I guess they meant by title. I don't.
I guess
Or
you
by
could do it
author.
either way. Yeah.
The read versus the unread as a way of organizing them. Standing up or lying flat as an option. Chronological order, which you brought up. Series together in order. By language, which you also brought up. By binding type, which you wouldn't want to group them all by binding type, but you might want to pick out a binding related issue, like you said about your top shelf behind you. That nice bindings, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Books based on book awards.
That's an interesting idea.
Author's nationality, which I would say is somewhat by language, and personal rating system, or randomly organized.
Oh, going feral. Well, I'm not gonna lie. I'm sure you would agree that like most people, if they have like enough books that it would be considered their own personal library, everybody has a junk drawer shelf. I think. I think it would be almost impossible that there's not a single, unless they're very, very, very well organized. Maybe I'm just telling on myself, but I have, for example, certainly a shelf of mine that I can think of right off the top of my head that I'm like, that's a junk drawer shelf. That's just everything else. Like there's nothing about it that suggests organization. It's just they fit here.
Right. Oh yeah, no, I definitely, that would be just, somebody could accuse me of that on almost any shelf here. of saying, well, you said this was blah, blah, blah. What's that book doing there? I'm going, well, and it is, the more books you have, the more pressure there is to not be able to follow some perfect plan, because you say, oh, that would be perfect, except I have more books than fit on that shelf. Now what do I do? Anyway, yeah, I've got Casey has recently taken over a bookcase that I had been using upstairs, and I was getting rid of enough stuff that we were kind of at a good point of transition. But then I had to find homes for all of the things that were left from that area that she wanted to use. So there were two little niches in the wall that you could actually put books in. One of them I had all the books by Roland Barthes, French literary critic. And then the one next to it, I had all the books by what's his name, Gaston Bachelard, another literary, scientific kind of guy. So then when that was lost to me, that area, I thought, hey, they're both French. That helps. And so I decided to put all of the French, I don't read French, but I mean translated from French, all the people in that kind of world of either literature or literary criticism or philosophical type thing. So that actually wound up pretty much together on another bookcase. So I got pressured into coming up with an organizational plan by being kicked out of my bookcase.
Well, going through that list that you just read off, are there any of those styles of organization that you would never want to do?
Probably color. Casey, I was talking about this show with Casey, and she said, before I didn't bring that up, but she said, well, there's my red group. And I'm going, but the only drawback is then the randomness potentially of what's in that group. So if a person said, oh, I want to read my Steinbeck novel, I believe that was a red book. Okay, let's go look in the red books and see if it's there. You know what I mean? That just seems really wacky. I know people do it for an aesthetic book of some kind. I've seen that done even in the library that I work in for a display, that they'll take books that have a certain color commonality and put them, in a display, just kind of, it's almost on a lark. It's like, okay, we're not choosing these books by the idea behind the book. We're just going to randomly pick because, oh, this has got the same shade of green, put that one in there. And so I guess at a library, it's kind of okay to say, we're shuffling things around. Who knows what somebody might be interested in? We're not trying to force them down a certain road. We're just going to say, we have all this. You want any of it? So it's kind of a cool idea at a library, not to keep them on the shelf that way, but to propose a random display that allows different things to get a day.
I actually think even in a personal library, that idea kind of appeals to me, not necessarily doing it as like a color display, but I was thinking about this recently because I know you have that spinning rack. Yes. And did I see that? I think I saw some post on like Instagram or something of somebody who had built one of those into their house so that it was attached to the ceiling and the floor and it was a spinning thing, but it was like wood, like it was nice, right? But the way that it was set up was not actually meant to be books being put on the shelf this way. It was just to have one on each level that was outward facing. So it was just for display. And I just saw the picture, I think, on Instagram. So I have no idea what their thought process was for this exactly, like how they were choosing the books for what would be there. But I was like, oh, that idea kind of appeals to me because you could like change that up and then it would be more of like a piece of art almost, so that when people came to visit you, it would be like art you could interact with because it might get them to be interested in whatever books you had on display or whatever. I thought that was a cool opportunity to do something interesting.
I guess that helps justify something in my mind that I used to think was just silly, but the idea of like having a coffee table that has a little stack of books on it, I always thought it was just a thing that people are inspired to do by looking at Architectural Digest and they're showing somebody's home and they, and I wanted to mention that a bookseller I used to work for in Cleveland, Ohio, for those who don't know the United States that well, he would sell books by the yard to department stores because they would have a setup with a bed and or whatever, a dining room table and a bookcase in the background and a lamp and all this stuff. And then they would want the bookshelf to be clear what the heck it was. So they wanted books to put on it and they didn't care what it was, what you got. So he could sell them by the yard, you know. And I think some people get, you know, some amount of their income from their book business by having that opportunity to sell books of
Well,
consequence, you know.
it's interesting you say that because Jack Edwards recently-ish, or it might not have actually been that recent, whatever. I recently saw a video that he did where he was talking about, I think it was Jack Edwards. Anyway, where he was talking about how books as a sort of status symbol or aesthetic object has kind of bled into celebrity culture recently, where like now there will be a lot of celebrities who go out of their way to be photographed holding books, and that it's become such a sort of ubiquitous celebrity thing to do recently that there is actually a position that a person can have that would be like a stylist for books, where they would be the one to choose, like for I don't know, like
Tatum Channing.
oh, Channing
Oh,
Tatum. Yeah, like yeah, it would be,
Channing
exactly. It
Tatum,
would be like, oh, he's going to go to some event and there's going to be downtime. So what book should he be photographed holding? And then this book stylist would be responsible for choosing what would be considered like good for his brand, basically like to be holding. So if he
yeah.
was doing like, I don't know, like it would be different if he was holding like Neruda compared to being shown holding like Stephen King, to be holding
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Tolstoy or something. So they would know what his brand was as a celebrity and would pick something that would be like appropriate to the brand. So it would almost be like product placement, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah.
And I thought that was a very interesting concept. Wouldn't you love having that job though? How fun would that be?
I guess you know, but you could misstep, you know, like you could go like, oh, everybody was aghast that that Channing Tatum was reading that book or whatever. You know,
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
that's kind of the idea, right? Oh, I know what he was talking about. He was talking about this issue, but he was specifically talking about some address that Kate Middleton recently gave, and there were books on the table in the background of what she was talking. And it's, I mean, obviously, all of that is contrived. Like every single thing in a shot with one of the royals is
right,
contrived.
right,
So it
right.
was like, oh, what books did they put on the desk behind like what where Kate Middleton was talking?
Exactly.
And so it was like Shakespeare and like other prominent like British writers. And so it was sort of like, look at all our British authors, and that were sort of like not contemporary, so sort of a not controversial
Right,
classic
right.
British writers.
Yeah, right.
And then he was talking about, yeah, the celebrities and the book stylists. And I just thought that was interesting. And I would say it's related to this topic because, again, being a reader and reading books and organizing the books that you have can be kind of separate activities. Because, well, I guess I'll ask you, because it sounds like to me when you're putting your books together on the shelves, it's less of an aesthetic question for you. It sounds like than it is a utility issue. Or
Yeah, I think that it might depend on the size of your library too. I
mm,
mean, you know, because it's sort of I've had periods where there were stacks of books here and there because there wasn't any room to put them on a shelf. And so, you know, you say, oh, if I get rid of this thing, I'm not going to reorganize everything at that point. I'm just going to stash the ones that I can get off the floor into those little nooks. So, so to me, it's never, yeah, I would like the books to be protected. And I would be happy if anybody wanted to wander around the house and see what I had, but we don't have it displayed in the sense of let's show this off. I think on the first floor there's been more care to, like where I am, I've got things sideways on top of the books, like notebooks and weird stuff that, you know, you'd never say it looks like a workroom rather than a library, you know. But so out in the more public domain of the well, we call it the library, it's the living room technically of the
mm,
house. Um, things are more neatly there. I mean, they're just lined up. Like I think we have all of the well, I think she just moved that. We had all these kids books that were ones that either you guys as kids loved or that I loved or that she loved to have. And so we had a big display of those. I mean, not a display. We had a big shelf or two, like, 5 feet wide or whatever
Mm.
above those. Anyway, that's fun, and and I think anybody approaching a bookshelf anywhere is kind of going like, what's the story here? Like, what's the, are these are, oh, if you're in a book sale and you go, these are random, like then you start just kind of wandering through. Like when I go to a Salvation Army, there's no organization of the books. They don't want to waste the time. But if you go to a bookstore, you'd think that they could go, oh, mystery novels are over here. It's an issue that you've had to deal with a little bit with the Rotary Club of
Yes.
what categories make the most sense given the space and the circumstances.
Yeah, and that's sort of where my interest, which I'd never really thought about too deeply, began in the idea of having an attractive display, because I had always kind of thought of it like, oh, I just need to know where something is if I want it, was kind of the basis of why I was putting anything in any particular place, right? But then having worked in a situation for those book sales where you're considering them not necessarily as like, I need to know where the book is to read it myself, but more like, how can I put this together to be appealing to people to want to buy this,
Yeah.
really made me reconceptualize how a display can be used even for a personal collection of books just for yourself. I don't know. That was when I first started thinking about it. Like, do you feel like, because obviously, like, you've always had your own private library and you've also always worked for like book shops and like things like that until recently at the library, which is different. But when you were working at bookshops, obviously, like displays are a really important part of the
Yeah.
bookshop sort of landscape. So I'm just curious, has any of that shaped your sensibility for doing your own library, or was there no overlap there?
Um, I don't consciously think of an overlap, but now that you mention it, I work at the library. I'm a page, so I'm not really in charge of anything.
Mm.
But one of my roles is to shelve the media. So let's say I'm shelving movies, which would be sort of the equivalent of shelving books in a way. And there are some display shelves in the section.
Mm.
And I take the opportunity to switch out things to, like, it's basically to expose the range of what's there. So I'm not just saying like, well, I like this movie, let me put that down there. I'm just thinking, let's have some, range of nationality or something like that, to try to give every movie its day in the sun. Like there's a shelf and you could put 4 movies on it, and then 2 cases over, there's another shelf like that. So it's just an opportunity to say, and people pick from there. And I've heard people assuming that they're recommendations, which
Mm.
I'm not really doing that. I'm simply exposing what we have in the collection. Somebody might go, oh, they're saying this is a good movie. Well, they might decide I don't trust them anymore. Because I wasn't saying buy this without thinking yourself. I was saying notice we have this in case you're interested. So
Mm.
it is sort of I don't know what you'd call it. I guess even a restaurant might do something like that. They might go, wow, we're really overstocked on potatoes. Why don't we offer a special thing that we're going to invent, a potato dish, and see if anybody's interested?
Yeah. Oh no, totally. And it's so interesting because like again, your own private collection is not something that people are going to be like perusing at random. It would just be whoever you would be inviting into your home, which is probably not that many people relative to like a library or a bookshop.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the idea of having a display is sort of like for whom? Like who is this display for?
Right,
But
right,
I don't know, something about that idea appeals to me nevertheless, where it's just this idea of like, but I don't have a bookshop. But I still have the urge to have a like recommended.
yeah, yeah.
No,
Well, I
I don't
mean,
know.
people. Well, if you're decorating a room, or you
Yeah.
decide, I'm really tired of that chair being over there, but there's nowhere to put it unless I move this other thing, and then all of a sudden you have this excitement of, here's a room. Things don't have to be the way they are at the moment. Wow, there's all these opportunities or possibilities.
Yeah. And
It's
I
fun.
don't know. I think that's because I'm not creative in the sense of like I produce art. Like that's not a creative outlet for me. Like I've never been like an artist, like I don't even know the specific type. That's how little I'm invested in this world myself. But like
Graphic.
whether it's
Yeah.
fine arts, I guess it's fine arts maybe. I don't know. Like I've never been able to draw very well. That's not like a skill I invested a lot of time in developing. And I don't really like paint or like produce art in that way. Like that's not a type of creativity I've ever engaged in, but I really do like organizing things. I find that to be a really nice creative outlet. So I will not infrequently move the books around. And I always find that to be really fun. Um, even though
Well,
nobody's going
actually,
to see it but me.
I think that's great because if you think of what an artist like with a drawing or a painting is, they're organizing shapes and colors on a flat surface, and you're doing shapes and colors in 3D.
Yeah. I guess so, yeah. But again, it is interesting because like now that we're talking about it, it is very different than because I've never like I have one shelf where I experimented with the color gradient thing and having like the rainbow shelf because that was very popular on like Instagram not that long ago and even on BookTube like a lot of people had the rainbow shelves like as the background for when they were
Okay,
talking
right, right.
and it caught a lot of flack for I felt like were very unfair reasons, which one of the ones that I found really baffling. I mean, I kind of understand where this comes from, I think, but I still think it's a little silly. Was if you organize your books like that, it looks like you don't actually read them.
Yeah,
Like,
that there's an element of that, but I would have thought that organizing them into a rainbow was a particular message image of what does the rainbow represent. No?
well, I mean that too, but I think it's just like one of those things where, especially in that sort of this sort of modern monochromatic era of interior design, it's like the way to have a splash of color, right? Because so many people are obsessed with that like Scandinavian like
Yeah, yeah,
gray and
right.
cream and white and just very
White.
matte
Yeah, I
colors.
know what you
Yeah.
mean. Yeah, yeah. The table's
And
white, the
so I
chairs are
think
white, the walls are white. Yeah.
yeah. So people would have they would have like white shelving because it was in that style of apartment. And then the
Yeah,
books would be the splash of color. So that I understood the like aesthetically, I understood the urge. It does look nice. I don't actually
yeah,
think it implies that you don't read them. I think the only thing I could think of for why people would think that is because of what you were talking about, where in like showrooms and things, if they have books, they might do it that way just because it looks nice. And
yeah.
so maybe because I there are even shops here where they have just like random old books just for like a decoration, not something that
Right,
they're
right. To
selling
show
or
you how you could use this shelf or something like
yeah,
that.
or just to fill space or something.
Yeah.
So I get that maybe that's what they're thinking of, but I thought it was such a weird critique to say, oh, organizing your books by color makes it look like you don't read them. I just thought it was so weird.
No, I bet it is a bleed over from the use of display in a department store type of setting where
Yeah.
it's it's simply nobody. There's no point in spending the time doing anything else. And I mean, in other words, somebody might, in the course of doing it, just go, well, let's put all the, let's do it kind of like sizes
Yeah.
descending, just for their own amusement as they set up a display. You know what I mean? It's like no harm in that. I would say too, like I was saying about if they're random, or if you don't have a ridiculous number of books, it's probably more fun to figure out different ways to display them. If you have a ton of books and you're going, how am I ever going to find this if out of it? I probably have 2,000 books or something.
I
If you
believe so.
if you said where, if you don't have some element of organization, you're going to be spending a lot of time looking for something. Boy, believe me, at the library, we do have such and such a book. Nobody's being able to find it, so you start coming up with how could it have gotten misshelved and where could
Uh,
it be? I mean, that's a library is more than 2,000 books. So
oh, yeah.
it's an awful lot of books.
Although, interestingly, apparently 1,000 is what you have to hit for a collection to be considered a library.
Hmm. Okay, I didn't know that.
Well, you're above it, so you don't have to worry about it. You already hit that bar.
I'm just guesstimating, but I'm sure I have more than 1,000.
Yeah, I'm very sure you have more than 1,000.
And some of it is just dead weight. I mean, there are books you go, okay, I'm never going to read this, but well, there's two books right over there. It's the
Mm.
same book, two different editions of the same book. I
Oh,
didn't
I
even
do that
remember
too.
that I had two of the same book until something came up where Casey wanted some information, and I pulled the book out, and then I said, wait a minute, I think I have another copy of this somewhere. Anyway,
Honestly, I almost feel like that's the part two to this conversation. And as a matter of fact, might not be a bad idea because it is sort of the 1-2 thing, right? It's like, how do you organize them? But also, why have a collection? Like, why hold on to books that you've already read, or like books that you haven't read but you've had for a really long time? I know my partner Kendrick, like he really gets on me about this sometimes because from time to time, just for fun, like I'll say, okay, from this shelf, like just pick one of these books, because I usually try to have like a some sort of, it's usually an 80s or 90s horror schlock novel in the mix of whatever I'm reading, because it's just a good palate cleanser. And so I have 2 shelves of horror books of that type. And so I'll just be like, hey, Kendrick, go pick one. Like I've pushed back all the ones that I've read, and everything that's pushed forward, like you can pick from those. And he'll say like, you've barely read any of these. And I'm chipping away at it, but I'll be like, oh, I know. But it's just sort of like, I need to have a lot that I haven't read, because like, then I have a variety to mood choose from. But
yeah.
then the ones that really frustrate him are when I've kept books that I didn't like, but I kept it anyway. And it is like kind of harder to explain. But anyway, I think that would be a nice 1-2 secondary topic, just because I think that they're somewhat intertwined, but I think that they're fairly separate topics. But I'm sure you and I would have a lot to say on that, because I know that that is part of what makes a person a collector of books versus just being a reader, is the books that you hold on to just as much as it's the books that you buy.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I have a lot of feelings and thoughts about that, which I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, one of my weird ones, I think this might have come up in another session of this, which is I have a collection that I've just still got for no real reason of mystery novels from, let's say, the 40s and earlier. And I over the course of time, especially being in the used book world, you'll go, oh wow, I know this book, but I've never seen this copy of it. So I wound up collecting like maybe 7 of the same book, just because they had different covers on all 7 of them. And at this point, I'm kind of going like, what the heck did I do that for? I was really excited about it at the time, and I still have them.
As I say, the number of little collections like that that I have amassed, like again, I'm lucky that Kendrick and I have come to we'll call it an understanding that books are not the same as knickknacks. So like, don't think of them as like we have 500 books. Think of it as we have 7 bookcases. That's only 7 things.
That's a good way.
Uh,
I certainly could get into a conversation about why would you keep a book if you've already read
mhm.
it.
We'll
And
put it we'll let's let that cook. I think that would be a good topic for the next one, actually, if you are down for that.
yeah,
Moving sort of into the secondary part, because I much more could be said about organization, but I think that's a nice amount to sort of chew on. So yeah, what have you been reading, and what are you planning to get into?
all right. Well, I'll start with, right now I'm reading Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon and enjoying it very much and keeping a notebook as I read it. I've just finished reading a book about Fermat's last theorem, which is a very simple. It's a very simple mathematical idea that took 300 years for anybody to actually prove it. To be real simple about that, everybody will remember from algebra, 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. Fermat said, I've realized that grouping of a to the some power plus b to the some power equals c to some power only works for 2 to the, in other words, to the second power.
Oh, okay.
Anything higher than that, cubed to the 4th power to the 5th power, with that same setup, nothing else will ever work. Only
Huh.
2. So everybody goes like, well, what makes you so sure about that? He goes, well, I haven't been able to prove it. And well, he actually claimed he had a proof, and he didn't have room to write it in the margin of the book that he was writing in. But anyway, it was a fascinating book about the history of that problem and the ins and outs of what it took to get to the answer. was most of it, a lot of it was way over my head, but the guy wrote it in a very lively style and it kept me going to read the whole book. Recently, I read, thanks to you actually, that I had it, was Zadie Smith's book, Fraud,
Oh yeah.
which was really enjoyable. Really liked that a lot. And the one that I kind of have in my mind, two that I have in my mind to read. One is called Lanark. I can't even remember the author's name off the top of my head. He's just, for some
Is
reason, this
it
guy.
Alistair Gray?
Yes, yeah, Alistair Gray, who, strangely enough, has just come back into the public consciousness because there's a movie out that's sort of a Frankenstein variation. Emily Stone, maybe,
Hmm.
and she dies, and this lunatic doctor puts her infant baby's brain into her body, and then the story goes from there. So it's sort of like a wacky Frankenstein variation. That's the same author, Alistair Gray, who
Oh,
has pretty
interesting.
much, disappeared from consciousness and suddenly came back with that movie. So, but Lanark seems very intriguing to me. And the other thing is is a book called Pedro something else with a P that I can't come up with, by the guy's name is Rulfo, Rulfo. That's the author's last name. Uh, they're both very short. The Rulfo one, Pedro something, um, was apparently very influential on a lot of major authors, and I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, both of them. Well, that one I think has surrealistic qualities to it, and the Lanark is written in a really weird way where it's like there's four chapters, but they're not set up as one, two, three, four. They're set up as something like 3, 1, 2, 4, something weird like that.
Huh.
And the author claims that he wants you to read the book and then stew it, let it stew inside you, and then you will understand why the
Huh.
chapters are thought to be thought of in this other way. Anyway,
Strange.
those are my two books that I'm thinking of reading. How
Yeah.
about you?
My April reading month was a bit all over the place, I guess. So one of the books that I read and finished was by a guy called Sasha Chaplin. And it was a chess book, but it was more of like a biography or a sort of an autobiography memoir thing about his experience as a small potatoes chess sort of competitor. But he was mostly talking about it from the perspective, again, of somebody who was never particularly good at it, never particularly famous or anything, but just a lot about his experience playing competitive chess and how it in some ways ruined his life. Like he got really obsessed with it and to
Oh,
the point
wow.
where he actually had to quit. And he was like, that was my last game of chess. I'm never playing chess again.
Wow. Wow.
And it was called All the Wrong Moves. And it was really, really approachable because it was obviously written with a lay person in mind who has no uh, knowledge really of probably barely not any knowledge of how to play the game. So it wasn't like he was constantly dropping the names of different chess configurations without explaining in a very approachable way what he was talking about and why he was bringing it
Yeah.
up. And really the driving force behind the plot, I suppose, was yeah, his just personal journey of like why it was that he was so obsessed with this that it became an addiction of his
Wow.
and in what ways it actually caused a lot of trouble in his life. And it was sort of, I would almost say it was a self-help book in disguise, but not in an obnoxious way. Like it wasn't preachy, it was just sort of his personal reckoning with his own feelings of inadequacy, where it was sort of like he felt anyway that he was a very mediocre person and had a kind of nothing life, like he wasn't doing anything interesting or extraordinary. And that he felt like chess and being competitive in chess could be something that would make him interesting and
Hmm.
would be like, oh, this is my identity. I am a chess player. And he
Right.
felt like he needed that because his own life and his own interests felt like not special or interesting enough. And so he went off on this whole thing as a result of feeling that way. And it wasn't until he was like very ill and he was like all by himself in this random town in India, like really sick
Hmm.
at like while he was competing in this chess tournament that he was like, I don't think I want to do this anymore. Like I feel like this is bad for me actually. Like I'm alienating all of the people around me just to be doing this, and I'm not even gonna ever be the best. Like I'm never even gonna be very good at this. Like I
Yeah.
just don't have that skill, and why am I doing this to myself? And it was very, very interesting. It was super approachable. I mean, usually I'm not huge on memoirs. In fact, I would say it's the only memoir I've ever read that I thought really nailed what could be good about that genre, which
Yeah.
is like you have to be a good writer, and I think more importantly you have to really have a strong understanding for what you're trying to say. Like, who is this for? Like, who is
Yeah.
this message for?
And maybe why would anybody else care to
That's
hear
kind
it?
of what I mean. Yeah, like, who is
Yeah.
your audience? Because
Yeah.
like I've read celebrity memoirs for book clubs before. Like we read the one from that was ghostwritten for Prince Harry, for example, Spare. And that
Oh,
one read very much like it was like, I'm Prince Harry. That's enough. It didn't feel like it didn't feel like there was a lot of care put into organizing it, or even choosing things to talk about that would be interesting from the perspective of being a prince of England. You know what I mean? Like he
yeah.
spent
Yeah.
so much of it talking about his military service, and I was like, and for what? Like loads of people have been in the military. That's not a unique perspective because you're the prince of England.
Right.
Like, why are we focusing on this? So, but this guy, Sasha Chapin, like, I really felt like he understood what the point of writing this was, and it had a very strong thesis that had a through line that by the end of it, like you felt like, oh, I understand what this journey was about and why he was writing this and what he was telling me. So I really, really liked that. It revived my faith that there can be good memoirs, actually.
Ah. Also, I would think too that chess is an interesting example where that can be very obsessive because
Yes.
there's no limit to the value of learning more and knowing more. And so that there's no point of saying like, well, I know enough now to be a world champion. You go, no, you never will. This is an endless obsession, to become that good. I mean,
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, that's really weird. That reminds me. I know we've talked about some movies about chess. Just a quick thing, but
Yeah.
did you ever see the one that had Lev? What's the guy's name? Scheider. Lev, the
Grossman?
guy. No, that he's an author. This is an actor. Lev. Yeah, Lev Schreiber. What it was basically, it was like the famous chess match.
Oh, Pawn Sacrifice.
It was basically Spassky Fischer,
Mm.
you know, and the other guy. Anyway, that's really a good movie about one guy who can handle playing chess and still have a life, and the other guy can only have a life as a chess player. Fisher was.
Yeah, it's a very strange world because I read that, and then this month and last month I started, and this month I'll finish another chess memoir by a totally different person, Peter Hoffman, who actually was at one point the editor in chief, I want to say, for the Encyclopedia Britannica,
Oh wow.
just among other like literary career things that he's done. But and his is called King's Gambit. And it is a memoir about his life and his relationship to his father and how it was connected to chess, but it's also in large part talking about different aspects of chess culture,
Hmm.
specifically like in the US. I think he's mostly focusing on that and bringing in, of course, all of the Russian players and Soviet players and how that went down, and like the sort of political side of it, and
Yeah.
very, very interesting historical tidbits about famous chess players. Like one of the ones that I've been telling everybody about was that it's not actually statistically true, but within chess circles, there's a very dark joke about how that chess players tend to kill themselves by throwing themselves out of windows, because
Hmm.
it has like happened more often than seems like it should be the case.
Huh.
Not like a statistically significant thing, obviously, it's just more of like part of the lore, but it has happened more than a few
Yeah.
times. I thought that was interesting. I was like, defenestration, interesting. Okay. And I
I
was
wonder
explaining
too,
this to Kendrick, and he immediately said, oh, that makes sense because of like the king. You knock the king over.
I didn't like the king down. I was thinking that once you establish the presumption of a pattern or the implication of a pattern. Anybody who's obsessed with chess that decides to commit suicide might think, oh, I know what I need to do, rather than that it's their own unique idea
Uh,
that
like a
happens to be the
self-fulfilling
same.
prophecy almost. Like,
Right. It's
oh,
sort of
all the
like,
famous chess players do
I
it.
guess to be appropriate, I should do this.
That's an interesting point, actually, speaking of aesthetics. But yeah, so I'm reading that one currently. And then the one I just finished for a book club I'm in is The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón.
Yeah. I started to read that once and I just really didn't get into it. What did you think of it?
Oh, oh. In short, I would say the first two-thirds I really, really enjoyed. And he just did not stick the landing for me. And when you're writing something as a mystery, if you do not stick the landing, I think that that is going to be a thing that the reader takes away with them was like, I really didn't like that because the ending was bad, not because there was anything wrong with anything else.
Yeah.
He just did that thing that I really don't like. And this isn't a spoiler or anything. It's just a stylistic choice that he made, but he builds up this really interesting mystery. And the plot it was really well plotted. There were peaks and valleys in all the right places. And it's all building up to the revelation at the end of like the resolution to the mystery. And he gives it to us in the form of a letter where this woman just writes a letter giving all of the answers to the protagonist to all of the things that were mysterious going on in the plot. She's just like, oh, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And
Yeah.
I'm like, why did you choose to do that? And it was,
Yeah.
and then it became sort of like my, one of the girls in the book club, she described it as like entering into like telenovela territory. And I totally agree with that very specifically. And maybe that was on purpose because he is a Spanish author and like telenovelas are a huge part of like Hispanic culture. I don't know about in Spain, but I know in like the South American countries, Spanish speaking countries, telenovelas are a big deal. So maybe that was a choice that he made on purpose, but it was just so tonally inconsistent that we both were like, this felt like he just didn't know what to do in the end.
I'm not familiar with the telenovela. Is there a brief version you could give me of what that
Like a
is?
soap, they're basically like
Oh, okay.
Spanish language soap operas.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, I know there are like revelations where a person would say, oh, it's because I have a twin brother, and like pulling it out
That
of
type of
nowhere.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very that type of thing. So like telenovelas are just very very overacted. I mean, it's part of the genre, so it's like a cultural thing where they do it on purpose, and it is still like a soap opera, so it's that style, but it's like considered its own genre, and like some people are really really into it. K drama is kind of like this, like Korean dramas, like they'll do that on purpose. Thai dramas a lot of the time like lean into that sort of soap opera esque thing.
Hmm.
Like it's just a stylistic preference for some people, I guess. I don't know. I like them sometimes, but that wasn't the book I thought I was getting.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
And
this
you
kind of
said,
gothic mystery that devolves into telenovela territory,
Hmm.
which is fine if you're wanting that, but we both agreed we would have been on board with that part of it, but for this letter thing where it was just like you couldn't think of any other way to reveal these answers to these mysteries you set up than this woman knew everything the whole time and wrote a letter about it.
Yeah, yeah. That's
Silly.
lame.
So that was sort of a letdown. And then next month, or I guess this month, for Dostoevsky, I have his short story Crocodile, which I started, and which is not one I know anything about other than that at the beginning a man gets eaten by a crocodile.
Hmm.
That's as far as I've got.
I admire the fact that you do a lot more experimental or adventuresome choosing of what to read. Um, well, I guess the two that I mentioned that I'm thinking of reading are new to me, but
Yeah.
uh, I usually have to have something to go on.
So I will let you I will let you go enjoy your evening, but that's I like this. This is a good talk.
Yeah, well, we stuck to our guns pretty much, and you'll probably have to do some editing, but and
All right, well,
yeah.
enjoy your evening and I will see you next time. And it sounds like we're going to be talking about why keep the book? Why hold on to the book?
Okay, I'm going to write this down. Why keep your books?
which it might be a very soul-bearing topic. I think that gets personal.
That's true. I've got some ideas on this already, but I'll save them for the proper time. Okay.
All right. Well, then it was lovely talking to you, Dee, as always. And thank you guys for watching on another meandering little bookish cozy talk.
Hopefully
And
people
we
are
hope to see
finding
you next time.
some of this interesting. We'll hope to hear back from somebody.
I do. I find it interesting.
Okay.
All right. Well, I will see you next time, Dee.
My love.
Bye.